And with no further ado, I would like to introduce you to our founding president, Norma Levy. Norma?
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. Today's talkback concerns the important but difficult Hungarian Holocaust film titled Fateless, which was filmed in 2005 and selected by our wonderful film sponsor, Nancy Fisher, for everyone at at New Plaza Cinema. And now it's my great pleasure to turn this over to our terrific curator, Gary Palmucci, who will lead the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Norma. Well, here we are again, live from the back room at New Plaza Cinema at Macaulay Honors College. So we took what was, at least for me, an unusual route to choosing our film for today's talkback. After several weeks of discussion between our New Plaza Cinema team and today's both of our esteemed guests, we were having difficulty finding a consensus on a title that focused on the experiences of young people in the Holocaust. So I volunteered to sort of spearhead a kind of elimination round amongst the three films that came up most frequently in our conversations. There was a 2010 French drama called La Raffle, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, about the early 1940s roundup of thousands of Parisian Jewish children. The 1990 film by Polish master director Andrzej Wajda, Korczak, about a courageous school teacher and his ultimately doomed charges. And Fateless, a Hungarian production about the relatively late in the war roundup of Jews in that country, which Nancy Fisher will detail for us shortly. Now, for reasons I needn't go into, I wound up screening all three of these films in a 24-hour period, which was an unexpected and really remarkable personal experience for me. Now, all three films have considerable merit, but we hope you'll find Fateless, the film that we ultimately chose, to be as rich in its unique and disturbing ambiguity as we all did. So I want to start off by introducing Nancy Fisher. This, I believe, is the third time Nancy has joined us on one of these programs. We did Sophie's Choice in 2022, which I remember very well. And then last year, unfortunately, I must have been in the projection booth somewhere when we did the also very good, deserves to be better known film, 1945, which we've also shown here theatrically. And Nancy's going to come on first. I want to just give you briefly some background on Nancy for those of you who haven't encountered her before. And let's just, good afternoon, Nancy. I have a bio here which seems to have momentarily slipped out of my hands, as sometimes happens.
Speak about myself.
Okay, well, here it is. So Nancy Fisher is a trustee of New York's Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is a living memorial to the Holocaust located at the very foot of downtown Manhattan. For 28 years now, she's also been interviewing Holocaust survivors for the USC Shoah Foundation in Los Angeles. Now, Nancy, you have a particular expertise, I know from talking to you, and from the very succinctly worded description here of the events in Hungary starting around 1944 or so, and perhaps you can lead off by reading those to us. Thank you.
Well, I didn't get the email, so I'm going to do it from memory. It didn't come through. It's not on my phone.
Sorry about that.
No. Anyway, the Hungarians were the last Jewish community to be invaded by the Germans on March 19th, 1944. There had been a series of anti-Jewish measures which were enacted after the Germans came in. And certainly before that, for example, there was a what they call the numerus clausus. There was a limit on number of Jews in universities. And this was a community which felt that it was part of the country, but there was clearly anti-Semitism there. But when the Germans came in, excuse me, the anti-Semitic laws started being published and enacted one by one. And the wearing of the Jewish Star of David became compulsory. And as you see in the movie, Jewish businesses were Aryanized, had to be given over away from their owners. And the deportations of about 440,000 Hungarian Jews from the environs of Hungary, not Budapest, started on May 15th up until July 9th of 1944. These were trains after trains, convoys after convoys of Jews from the environs of Hungary that were deported to Auschwitz before the deportations were stopped. Excuse me, and then the Jews of Budapest were trapped. The film also details one aspect of the treatment of Jewish men in what they called the labor service, which in Hungarian I am not able to pronounce. They were sent to the front, to the Eastern Front, to fight the Soviet advance. They were ill-equipped, they were ill-clothed, and they were ill-fed. Many were brutalized in ways which are documented. There were some service company commanders who were kind to the Jews in their companies, but many were not, and they were singled out for brutal treatment.
Can you tell us a little bit about this group called the Arrow Cross? Was this sort of an in-house fascist organization in Hungary?
The Arrow Cross came into power, I think in the summer of 44. They were identifiable by the hats that they wore, which had a black feather sticking out of them. Excuse me, that's when the government changed hands. And they were prominent in hunting down Jews in Budapest. The Hungarians who helped round up the Jews in the environs were the gendarmerie, but the Arrow Cross were to be feared by Jews. And you'll see them in the film. You'll see the role of the labor service as the protagonist's father is sent off. And you don't know whether he's going to return. Thousands of Jewish men died in the labor service, but those that survived, were not deported.
And for those of us who may not recall with precision the history in late World War II, this was in the summer of 1944, and D-Day, the invasion of Europe, was June 6, 1944. So this is pretty late in the game for something like this to be happening, right? A mobilization like this.
Well, the Germans were after the oil that was, they were losing the war. They had obviously lost the war. The Russians were advancing from the east to the west. But Eichmann came in, and the record of the deportation, the number of Jews that were deported so quickly to Auschwitz, was enabled not by German soldiers or SS, but by the local gendarmerie. And then the Arrow Cross came in and they hunted down the rest in Budapest. So it was astonishing even to Eichmann at how quickly the neighbors, as it were, who were in the police, the gendarmerie, rounded up their neighbors, their Jewish neighbors, and brought them to the brickyards, which you'll see in this movie, put them on the trains to Auschwitz.
So this is kind of a singular situation for other middle European countries.
Yes.
And it's
And there are many,
efficiency, I guess we would say.
there are many other stories to the fate of Hungarian Jews that go on from this particular portrayal. But that's it in a nutshell from memory.
Well, maybe we can now bring in our other special guest, whom I have the pleasure of speaking to a couple times this week for a little bit of background. And this is Dr. Rachel Baum, who is a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. She is the director of the Sam and Helen Stahl Center for Jewish Studies. And she has a fascinating personal website, which I started to dig into. I wish I had had more time, in which she covers, as she puts on her website, digital pedagogy, Holocaust memory, and other things that matter. Good afternoon, Rachel.
Thanks so much. So good to be here to talk about this film with all of you, both of you here and everyone else.
You know, I think to maybe kick off our discussion, you sent me an essay, which probably I feel like I needed to read it 2 or 3 times to fully take in all the details and appreciate it. But kind of remarkable essay by the author of the book that Fateless was based on, which is translated, I guess, literally fatelessness in English. That's the title of the book here in America. And can you pronounce his name for me so that I don't mispronounce it?
Imre Kertész.
Okay, and Imre Kertész also is the author of an essay called "Who Owns Auschwitz," which you sent me a copy of, 6 or 7 pages of dense and really beautifully argued, essentially answering that very question, and also a few hilarious asides where he goes into other representations of the Holocaust, including the always controversial film "Life is Beautiful" by Roberto Benigni, in which he describes the entry into Auschwitz as having about as much historical verisimilitude as the ship in Fellini's "The Ship Sails On." If you remember that, that film is supposedly about an Austro-Hungarian liner, but of course much of it is very serious as well.
Well, this film is particularly interesting because the screenplay was written by Kertész, who has so much to say about what it means to represent the Holocaust. And so he's like bringing the viewer into discussions that the viewer isn't even aware of necessarily. Like most viewers who go to see a film about the Holocaust aren't thinking about, oh, what does it mean to represent the Holocaust? But actually, the idea of whether the Holocaust even can be represented has been discussed, ever since the end of the Holocaust, right? The idea that the actual experience of the Holocaust can't be represented. And so Kertész is really engaged in that. And he says, in that piece that I sent you, he says, no representation can be even considered that lets us think at the end of the film that there is a person. I can give you the exact quote here. He says, I regard as kitsch any representation of the Holocaust that fails to imply the wide-ranging ethical consequences of Auschwitz, and from which the person, in capital letters, and with it the idea of the human as such, emerges from the camps healthy and unharmed. Right? Like in all of his writing, he wants us to understand that the Holocaust was a liminal event that not only changed everything for the people who experienced it, but that should change everything for us too. Right? That we live in a world in which this was possible, in which this happened.
To be clear, Rachel, now he was born in 1929, of course, so this is an autobiographical story. He lived it.
He did, yes.
Without embellishment, he was there.
Yes. And it's interesting that a number of survivors, some survivors, of course, choose to tell their stories as memoirs or as testimony. But he, along with some other people, decided to tell it as a novel, right? And so the book, he says, is not a memoir, right? And so it's almost like he wanted to create some space that it's authentic, he was there, but also he wanted to give himself the freedom to not only have to tell his own story.
We were, Nancy and I know you were as well, kind of thumbing through the novel, looking for good quotes that could sum up, what the film also, I think, very effectively conveys, the experience of this young boy, and which is perhaps a slightly different take than we're used to in some other Holocaust films that we may be more familiar with. And it's at one point during the latter part of the novel, the boy is asked by a journalist to describe, what his interrogator calls the hell of the camps, quote unquote. And it says here, the narrator carefully recalls his reply. I remarked that I had nothing at all to say about that, as I was not acquainted with hell and couldn't even imagine what that was like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And in the film, right? I mean, so much I think about this film is shocking to the viewer if we really take it in, right? And that's one of those moments where he says, hell doesn't exist in the film. He says, hell doesn't exist, but the camps do. Right. And he wants to say, like, no easy metaphor. Oh, it was like the camp. It was like hell. Right. And he keeps sort of resisting to say, I want to tell you about my experience, and you may not be able to completely hold it, but this is the truth of my experience. Right. And so some of the things he says, I think, are so shocking. And I think this really, I want to make sure that we really focus on him as a child. Right. What does it mean to be 14 and to go through this experience? And when he says at the end, and I feel like we're skipping, so I'll come back to the beginning, but when he says at the end that he misses something about the camp, it's so shocking for the viewer.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that articulated in a film on this subject, for sure.
Yeah. But I was thinking, in preparing for this, I was thinking about how much this film is about the education of a child. Right. And so how a child is ripped from his traditional education, he's taken out of school. It's the first scene when he gives the note to his teacher, he's out of his school. And then the rest is about this education that he never actually wanted or signed up for. Right. And there's that scene in the film when the boys are sitting and they say, we should have studied nothing but Auschwitz.
That's right. Well, they're sitting outside a smoking, let's call it.
And
facility-
again, that's one of those
facility or whatever.
moments, right, that really stuns us. Like, what does that mean? We should have, in a way, it's an indictment of civilization, of what we're doing, right? Where he says we should have studied nothing but Auschwitz. And then, of course, Bandy, Citrom, and others try to teach him, right? From the tell them you're 16, don't tell them you're 14. And Bandy saying, always keep food, always have a bite of food in your mouth. Don't, right? And he's getting this education.
And in your pocket.
Yeah. Yeah, this education that he never wanted, that we don't want for him. But it's like he wants us to have to live with it, that this happened to children, right? That this, what does it mean that this is the education?
That's a remarkable scene where the boys are lined up at the beginning, and they're all trying to lie their way to say that they're 16 years old, including this one boy who looks like he's maybe 10. And he's very, he's filmed in close up with a machine gun barrel kind of in his face as he's trying to lie his way through. And the very pathetic Nazi guard who's, kind of sizing each one of them up, believing some and not others. Now, Nancy, you've been very keen on the depiction in this film, which you think is quite unique. There's a lot of Holocaust depictions that we've seen where there's plenty of machine gunning and gassing and rioting and so forth, but just the mundane physical detail in this film of the agony of standing up for hours at a time, or the collapse of limbs and psyches, and the lineups even before the sun comes up. In several key scenes of the movie. This is you described this very eloquently to me this past week.
Well, I'll try to recall my eloquence, if one could use that word in even going over that scene. Well, it's several times. It's the scene is, of course, the daily, what they called appel, which is the counting of prisoners. And the first scene actually goes right to, one collapses at the end of the line. But prisoners were counted for hours and hours, and in all kinds of weather. So without anybody necessarily, I wasn't there, the brutality was just in the silence and the standing there and having to endure, those moments. There is, and it haunts me still. The one actor who is in the middle of the line and they're all moving, they're all trying not to collapse, but one of them contorts himself in such a way it's terrifying. It's so painful to watch, and it projects suffering and agony and starvation and closeness to collapse or death that I've ever seen without saying a word. It's all in the body movements, and then the hands, where he's
You
his
both
hand.
used a word the other day when we were speaking, which I had never heard before. I think it's a word that everybody should hear it here and kind of write it down. It has a terrible eloquence of its own, describing a condition of the body, a combination of starvation and psychological exhaustion and any other kind of exhaustion one can imagine of the human body.
Well, right, Rachel, you can speak to that. That's the
Yeah,
Muslim.
the word is a Musulman, and the word literally means Muslim. And it's a word, there was a camp vocabulary, right? There was language that prisoners used among themselves to describe what was going on. And this was the word that prisoners used to describe people who, what we might say were like the Walking Dead, right? That they were alive in name, but not alive. Their spirits had left their bodies. And it was a fear and something that people talked about in the camp, not wanting to become a Musulman, right? And there's been a lot written about Musulmaner. And I think it's really interesting because I think that this film in many ways is trying to help the viewer to see what it means to live between life and death. Right. And that, like Nancy said, that one actor, that one figure is so poignant, but all of them are swaying. Right. So there's a sense that any one of them, that could happen to any one of them. It happened to that one person. And I also interestingly saw that in Kertész's Nobel, he won the Nobel Prize in 2002. And in his Nobel speech, he tells a story about that he was sent from Buchenwald. He was sent a card, and I think I have it here. Let me, it says, let's see if I can find the piece of paper to read it for you exactly. He says, one day I received a large brown envelope in the mail. It was sent to me by Dr. Volkard Nicke, the director of the Buchenwald Memorial Center. He enclosed a small envelope with his congratulatory note and described what was in the envelope. So in case I didn't have the strength to look, I wouldn't have to. The envelope contained a copy of the original daily report on the camp's prisoners for February 18th, 1945. In the decrement column, I learned about the death of prisoner 64921, Imre Kertész, factory worker born in 1927. The two false data, the year of my birth and my occupation, were entered in the official registry when I was brought to Buchenwald. I had made myself 2 years older so I wouldn't be classified as a child and had said worker rather than student to appear more useful to them. In short, I died once so I could live. Perhaps that is my real story. If it is, I dedicate this work, born of a child's death, to the millions who died and to those who still remember them.
This is about 2 months before the end of the war in Europe and the subsequent
I
liberation.
mean, incredible, right? That he gets this notice of his own death, right? Of course, he did live, but I think it just gave me chills reading that, knowing this film and knowing how much it wants us to see that line between life and death. And of course, he says in the film, I realized at that point I could be killed at any moment, right? That death is always with him.
And then, I think at the time, we didn't know him as well as an actor as we now do for obvious reasons, but there's a very effective, and I think he's very good in the part. He has just 2 scenes. Daniel Craig appearing at the end of the film at the liberation of the camp and trying to persuade the young boy to essentially go with him. He's going to get him into the United States. He's going to put him, pass him through the zones and other various things that are already springing up around Hungary. And the boy, he doesn't want to hear. He's not interested. He doesn't want to hear about it. And Daniel Craig is sort of a little incredulous, but then he lets him go. That's a beautiful exchange and a telling exchange.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that the film starts where it does and ends where it does. Like it could end there, but it wants us to go back with him to Hungary, because we have to see, as Nancy so skillfully pointed out, even without notes, the importance of the Hungarian gendarmerie, which we see in the beginning, right? That these aren't Germans sending them off, who are stopping who are stopping them and making them get off the bus. These are Hungarians, right? This is being done to them by their own country people. And then at the end, we see when he goes back home and the woman says, no, this is my house. right? And so the film wants to make sure that
Yep.
we see, right, what it means to be a Hungarian in this, the complexity of his relationship to the land of his birth.
Sorry, Nancy, about that email. I see that I sent it to myself, but you pieced it together very well. I think, and the director, a man named Lajos Koltai, who was a very respected and accomplished cinematography for decades in Eastern Europe, and he shot the film Mephisto, which I'm sure many of us have seen, the Oscar winner for Best Foreign Film in the '80s, and another excellent film called Confidence by that same director, Istvan Szabo. And he spends a lot of time in this film, sort of, I think the first 40 minutes or so, really, we are in Budapest, and the dinners and the get-togethers and the farewell of the father as he goes out to the labor camp, and that all that business with the school bus and the kids, sitting down in the ditch for a period of time. He really, I think that pays off. I would say there's a ratio, whatever, there's fewer pages in the book lengthwise spent on that than there is in the film. But I think it's a very effective strategy, even though you're a little puzzled at first that we're getting so much screen time devoted to it.
I think in part because the film needs us to understand what it means to lose your childhood, right? That we need to understand, in the beginning, and he talks more about this in the book, that he says, like, I did what I was told, right? Like, he's a kid, he's a good kid, he does what he's told. And then for a while, that works for him in the camps too, right? And he tries to learn the system of the camps. If I just do what I'm told.
Yes.
But then he realizes that it's a place with rules, but it's not a place where knowing the rules can save your life, because of course the violence was, completely could come at any time. And where of course we see illness and disease as much as the violence could take your life. Right. And so I think in the film, we see him with his full head of hair and his kind of innocence, right? Where he says, like, oh, I'm old enough to know, you can tell me the truth.
Right.
But he's a kid. Right. And then who it is who returns.
Maybe
right?
a bit
It's
of a
no longer a
precocious child, but a very dutiful child in many ways, and with fairly conventional responses to things in terms of obedience and the chain of command in the family and so forth. And the mother and stepmother and uncles and various other characters that we spent some time with at the beginning. Well, this is usually the time at the program here when we bring in our visual analyst, Dan Cahill, to do some analysis of the film, which is a very rich film visually, which is also perhaps a little, there's a bit of a tug of war going on about that issue in terms of its impact and its effect on us as viewers. And Dan, I know we skipped over the trailer in haste there at the beginning. I wonder if the trailer is useful for us to show, because it will give us some flavor of what you're also going to show us subsequently.
Okay, are you suggesting that I don't have the control over that? I think Lori has it.
Yes, I think Lori is taking our cue here, and she's put the title card up on the screen, which means I think
that's my display.
Oh, that's yours. Okay.
Yeah.
Lori, I think the trailer, which is about 90 seconds, if you can run it, let us know. Otherwise, we can go right into Dan's.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Give me one
Okay.
second.
I think it might be a
Can
useful
you, Dan,
preamble.
I need you to stop screen sharing your stuff first.
There you go.
Thank you. There you go. Thank you. Share screen. Okay, that's interesting.
I would say, Lori, if it's difficult,
Yeah, I'm not.
we can live without it, because Dan,
Yeah.
I know, has plenty of visual material.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I
That's
don't know where
okay.
it went.
Okay. So I'm back with the title card for the film. And this is an extremely ambitious and costly film for cinema of that era in Hungary. This is the opening shot of the film, and I want you to take note. I'm going to be talking a lot about color in this and how it's used as a creative tool. And notice the extremely limited palette when the film is in color. Here we see earth tones, the occasional flesh tones, And the only green that you see in this film is a very muted one, such as the storefront in the background on the left. So the movie is about dehumanization, and desaturating the color is a metaphor for people losing their humanity. All right. Oh, why am I not advancing? Okay. All right, let me, whoa, I'm not getting any response on my PowerPoint. What's going on here, folks? Oh, technical glitches. Oh, all right. I think I can just click on these. Yeah, now I'm back. Okay. This is a scene in the father's jewelry shop before they go off, before he's sent off to forced labor. And I think the window light in this film is especially lovely. I also appreciate the fact that the director and cinematographer enjoy shooting through things, such as a window inside the shop. It's very good cinematography by today's standards of what looks good. Here is a dinner scene for the family, and note the somber clothing. And maybe this was a factor in Jewish life in Hungary. I don't know, but as an expressive tool, the palette is very limited. You never see a red or a blue until some significant moments, and I'll show at least one red that comes up later.
And Dan, this screen ratio that we're looking at, this is called, it has many names: Panavision, CinemaScope, anamorphic. This is something that is challenging to work in, but it can yield visual riches, as I think we're seeing here, right? It's not the
Yes,
easiest thing
indeed.
to do.
Oh, indeed. It would be my preferred aspect ratio if I were to direct a film of this scope. It's a challenge to use it because you need a special lens that will squeeze the wide image onto a standard 35mm film. That's the most I'll go into on that, but it's a little unwieldy, but it leaves great riches and rewards visually. All I wanted to show in this frame is the light on the left coming through the window. Notice how it's got sort of a visible quality to it. And that's usually because the director of photography has added some smoke and perhaps some oil with the smoke to make the light visible. Here we are, very somber colors. Again, this is on a way station on the way to Auschwitz. Everybody in black. The facial skin tones are about the most colorful thing you see in the frame. Another interesting shot, shooting through the window of the train, going through the countryside in winter, and the barbed wire speaks for itself. Now we are in Auschwitz, and I should point out that all of the structures in the camps were built by the film crew to exact scale. And that was a huge item of expense, not to mention the fact that there were literally thousands of extras used in the film. So this was a very expensive production. And at one point, the financing collapsed and they had to restart it. And not every film can recover from that sort of thing. Once again, the color is almost completely gone in this frame, as it is here. You can barely glimpse some flesh tones of the people sitting down in the foreground. But other than that, it is gray, it is black, it is grim.
This is the scene, right? That was the scene Rachel alluded to about being taught, Auschwitz.
Indeed, indeed. And I'm just curious about the hat that Rachel mentioned, or I'm sorry, maybe it was Nancy, about the arrow.
Fascist hat.
Yeah, this is clearly the sort of Hungarian fascist hat and uniform that I think you were talking about. Am I right?
No.
No? Okay.
Oh, that's a capo in the camp.
Okay.
They had their own fashion statement, the Kapos.
Indeed. Once again, things are getting very desaturated. This is the iconic shot that was on the poster and the DVD cover for the film. This is the lead actor, Marcel Nagy. And he was about 12 or 13 when he made this film. And here's just an interesting coincidence. 12 years later, he was in another Hungarian film about the Holocaust, which is the one we mentioned that we screened a year ago, 1945. And here he is in his mid-20s.
Wow.
He played the younger of the two men, the son of the older man who visit the village in the film. And interestingly enough, there's a moment when he is shoveling and you can glimpse the tattoo on his forearm. This is perhaps the only moment of happiness, joy. I've labeled the frame Happy Hour in my notes. We see Gyurka, the character on the right, and his friend in the camp. And this is the 1 hour out of every day between the hard labor and supper when they could kind of goof around. Now it's night. Not a trace of color to be seen. These people are almost completely dehumanized. They've lost all of their dignity. Here we are, another one of the lineup scenes. And this is in daylight, mind you, but you still see very little of the flesh tones. Nighttime. This is when they are witnessing the hanging of the captured escapees. And this is perhaps the most harrowing scene of the film, for me at least. I'm still haunted by it. I suspect he was clawing his way to the latrine at the top of the hill. I don't know for certain, but that seems to be why he would leave the cabin in the middle of the night. And here looks like the same structure on the left of the frame. This is just an example of the kind of composition that a cinematographer would be proud of, having the lonely, despair-filled character at that side of the frame, and the only spot of color is either the rising or setting sun. It's not entirely clear which that is. Here is our protagonist being confronted with the fact that he has been stealing the food of the the young boy next to him who died. And the gauntness in his eyes was makeup. And apparently it took several hours every day to apply the makeup to him as things kept getting worse and worse. And here is sort of the nadir of his story as they are carting him off, barely alive, to bury him. Now, this is an interesting shot. This is an upside down view of a crematorium where the human skeletons are about to be burned up. And it's upside down because Gyurka, our protagonist, is being carried upside down by one of the guards in the camp. And so this is his point of view. And I also think it might have been a way of helping the audience be a little removed from these horrible scenes that we have glimpsed before in other films. And at last, some color. He's in a hospital and he is covered with a reddish blanket. Again, the color is very desaturated. And when I use that term, this is the term that most camera people would use, is it's drained of its vivacity, its brilliance, and it's very muted, as is everything in this sequence of the film. But it's nice to see a warm color like red appear. And it's a nice moment when he's able to pull this good, working, healthy blanket over him for comfort. And the aforementioned Craig, Daniel Craig, interestingly, 1 year before he emerged in Casino Royale as Mr. Bond. I love this shot of Gyurka looking at himself in a mirror as his ordeal is nearing the end. He's got a really interesting face, and it's used beautifully here. Here he is back at home with his family, clearly disappointed by what he has found there. But he looks better, and he looks like he's recovering. And this is the closing shot of the film. And again, there is no effort to resaturate the colors. It still looks like a drained community. And it may have something to do with the fact that in the first shot, they were under Nazi control, and now they are under Soviet control, at least for the next 10 years until there's an uprising in 1956. So this may be a sort of a dark way of looking at what Budapest in particular was going through at that time. So that is all I have to show there, but I want to talk just for a couple of minutes. First of all, the director, Lajos Koltai, has described the story structure in this film is what he describes as a series of etudes. And we know that there are these short scenes, a minute or two each, that have blackouts in between them. And the way he described it is you get used to it and then it's gone. And it's a very ephemeral sort of way to shoot. And he likened shooting a film, this film in particular, like being in a war. And he would not be the first director to describe that as leading your own army against people who are out there trying to prevent you from finishing your film.
It
So
was his first feature, Dan, right?
I don't believe so.
No?
I could be wrong. I failed.
We'll look that up when we have a moment.
Okay. But the one other contributor to this film is the composer, a very famous name in European and American cinema, Ennio Morricone, who died about 3 years ago at age 92. And I looked up his credits. He has 529 films that he scored. Now, all of those are not feature length. Some of them were shorts. But I would urge you, if you're curious about this guy, a lot of film people know his name and buy his soundtrack albums. I've got a score of them. It's beautiful, beautiful music. And I think that's one reason why he was chosen as a composer for this, is the disjunction between what we're looking at on screen and the soft and sometimes sweet melodies that we hear coming out of the speakers. I will say a couple of quotes from him. There's a wonderful documentary about the making of the film, and they interview Morricone. And he said the greatest moments in his life, in his career, are when he makes a director happy with the music that he has delivered for the scene. And there's even a scene there of Koltai smiling and nodding to him that they got it right. He says he composed 3 different tunes, 3 different melodies that recur in different ways in the movie. The first one combines a folk tune with a sort of childish music. I have not gone back to listen to the music in particular since I learned this, but it's interesting. The second melody describes loneliness, and the third one, he says, describes suffering. So he definitely knew what he was doing in putting the music on this film. And I can't wait for the soundtrack album to arrive. So,
Oh, yeah. Well, in fact, it was Koltai's first feature, and he's only made a couple of features.
okay.
Probably went back behind the camera after that to.
What's interesting is also in this documentary, they interviewed the cinematographer on this film and asked him. He's by the way, he's Hungarian but based in LA and shoots a lot of American features. And he said, well, they asked him, what's it like going to shoot a film for Koltai, who was a very highly praised cinematographer? And he took the nice way out of answering it. And he said, it was reassuring for me to know that I was working for a director with a very strong visual sense. And I knew I could communicate with him. And it clearly paid off very well in this movie of, I was going to say stunning beauty. It's not always beautiful, but the imagery and the way they execute the film is just beautiful in its own way. I'll leave it at that. It's beautiful craft.
Well, Nancy and Rachel, before we go to questions, do you have any thoughts you'd like to finish here about some things we were discussing in the first 30 minutes?
First of all, I'd like to thank all the people who I can't see who are watching this, who are interested in this film or in this period of history, for taking the time to join us. I want to thank Gary. I want to thank Rachel, whom I'm now, I guess, permanently connected to. She gave a stunning course on Holocaust cinema through Yeshiva University, which is how I first met her. But for those who are watching and who are interested in the 3 collaborations that we have done on the Holocaust, The talkbacks are in the newplazacinema.org archive. You can go and watch them if you want to watch the films first. If you haven't seen 1945, I'm sure many have seen Sophie's Choice, but the talkbacks are really very, very good. So I recommend that you do that if you have some free time. And thank you, Gary. Thank you, Daniel. And Rachel.
Anytime.
Nancy.
Well, don't say anytime, but it started during the pandemic. Right? This
That's right.
collaboration started during the pandemic, and I was very grateful to New Plaza Cinema for the talkback programs that they had during that time. We were all housebound.
Well, and I'll add my thanks. And also just to really highlight how important events like these are for continuing Holocaust memory. We're doing this in April because of Holocaust Remembrance Day. And one of the things I want to make sure that everyone knows is that 1.5 million children were murdered during the Holocaust. It is an overwhelming figure. And I think one thing that this film does really well is that the stories of children are sometimes used in sentimental ways, right? Like they're used to say, oh, children were innocent. And it can be over sentimentalized. And that's been one of the criticisms of the representation of children as Holocaust victims. And I think this film is really stunning. And, you know, the music that you pointed out, Daniel, it's emotional, but it doesn't sentimentalize the character.
Right.
That they're all innocent. They're all, you know, and he's one of them. He's not separated because he's a child. He's one of other children and other humans. And I think that the film deserves recognition for that too, that accomplishment of telling the story of a child without sentimentalizing him.
And some of the best music in the film is evocative of yearning and missing things. And it's a beautiful melody that you can't ever hear again because it's going away along with your childhood. There's a lot of that in the music. I also just want to underscore, we've made reference several times now to 1945. If you can find it and stream it and watch our discussion, it is really in its own way a more deep and profound film than this one is. It's rather cryptic in its storytelling, but if you watch it at least a couple of times, things start to emerge in it. And I had to go back through it to find that frame of the actor 12 years later, and it just evoked all sorts of things that I really would like to go back and see again. Enough of that. Q&A.
Yeah, so I'm back. And we have a question, but before I take that question, if anyone wants to ask a question, there is a reaction button on your screen. Usually it's at the bottom. If you do want to ask a question, please hit that and we'll call on you next. Eddie, if you could please start your video and your audio. Hi, Eddie. We need you to start your audio.
Yeah,
There you go.
okay,
We hear you.
Hey.
great. So just thank you so much for directing me to this film. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, and I thought I had seen all the films, but I had not seen this one, and it was one of the most difficult, and showed some things that usually aren't shared on film about the Holocaust. One of the things that was very touching, and Viktor Frankl, I believe, wrote about it, was the way that they helped each other. And a couple of things brought things that my father said back to me. He disagrees with the saving a piece of bread strategy. He told me that he believes that the way that he survived was to eat anything that was given to him immediately and to sleep as much as possible. The hardest part of the film for me was towards the end when he was so sick and waiting to be taken to the hospital. I was so upset that he might die because my mother's sister was very sick at the end of the war, and was one of those who was chosen to be taken to hospital in Sweden. And she did make it to the hospital, but she died there. And it just really, you know, I don't know what I would have done if he had died. One other thing that I'd like to share that is meant to have a bit of humor, because it's, anyway, all of the adults in my childhood were Holocaust survivors. My parents, my aunt and uncle, and they had a kind of large social group who were all Holocaust survivors. And we were at a holiday dinner where all the adults were Holocaust survivors. And there had been something in the paper about the Hungarians who were in concentration camp. And my father said, "Ha, the Hungarians? They were hardly in the concentration camps," which was true compared to the length of times that the Poles were in the concentration camps. And, you know, that's the way that he was. And just wanted to share those, like, the way that resonated with me and my own experience. I also have one last thing to say, and that is that it's not a smoking building, it's a crematorium. And I think it's important to refer to it that way, in the same way that people say, you know, someone perished in concentration camp. And no one
I
perished.
think I said that, and I'm sorry, that's really not an accurate description of when the boys are sitting up against the wall of one of those buildings.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely right.
a crematorium, and people didn't perish, they were murdered. And you know, I think that's important.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate, I mean, thank you so much for all of those comments. And I think what your father said is so interesting, because you see in the film how much nationality matters, right?
Yeah.
And what it means to meet somebody from your own country, but also how there's division there too, right?
Yes.
Where he says, oh no, he's religious, right? So he's from Budapest too, but not our Budapest.
Well,
Right. And so it's interesting, right, to see the
Right.
divisions even in the camps, which is
They weren't, I don't think they hung out together in the camps.
What did it mean? Like, because the one guy said, you know, what does the U mean? And the boy said, you know, for Hungarian. And then the other guy said, no, it means something else. Was he kind of like hallucinatory, or
I
like?
think he's making a,
Ungar.
I'll
Ungar.
tell you that all of the Polish people that I knew, concentration camp survivors, they hated Poland. And they hated Poland when they were living there. It was very anti-Semitic. My mother said that you could not go out on Christmas for fear of losing your life. And my aunt was walking in the streets of Manhattan, you know, many years after the war. And of course, they were all fluent in Polish, and someone was speaking Polish in front of, she was walking with my mother, and they were saying anti-Semitic things. You know, the other thing, tell me if I'm talking too much, please. I don't want to take up everybody's time. If I could just mention one more thing, and I promise it'll be the last thing. The Holocaust survivors were called Greeners in America, at least in New York, where we were. And they weren't happy that the Holocaust survivors were here. They were afraid that they were going to reduce their status, which they had, I'm sure, worked very hard to attain. My mother took me to visit a cousin of hers who was here well before the war. And we went to her apartment. It was a beautiful pre-war apartment. And she was sitting in like the vestibule. And we never got past the vestibule. And I never heard about her or saw her again.
Interesting.
Yeah. So,
Thank you for sharing all of that, Eddie.
Thank you very much.
well, thank you for listening. Since I've seen the film, I've just been bursting to say it.
Well, that's
We're
okay.
happy we brought it to your attention.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Sheila, you're up next. Can you unmute and start your video?
Hi,
Hi, Sheila.
um,
How are you?
I want to thank you for showing the movie. I too have never seen this movie, so it was good that I watched it. I've seen a lot of Holocaust films. And I just want to say, one of the speakers was talking about somebody who was involved with the novel or the film, who said none of us can possibly understand what it was really like to be in a concentration camp. And of course, that's true. But unfortunately, one of the conclusions from that could be, well, why should we watch movies or why should we read books? And I feel in a very tiny way that being Jewish, even though I was born right after the war, it's the only way I can really show kind of my respect and appreciation for this historical horror, is to keep myself informed about what happened. So I'm not sure what the implications are of saying we can't understand it. Of course we can't, but we can read about it. We can be knowledgeable about it. And it came up just this past week. I have a friend who often watches your Sunday presentations. And I said, oh, are you watching Sundays? Did you watch the movie? And she said, oh, I never watch movies about the Holocaust. And I'm not trying not to be judgmental about this, but I feel the opposite, that it's the very least I can do is to have some historical memory that the Holocaust happened. And it's been 75 years since the Holocaust. And sometimes I wonder, 75 years from now, I won't be here, of course, what will people even know about it? You know, every once in a while you read that they do surveys of high school seniors, and they say, you know, when was World War II? And the students don't really know, or they say, well, what caused World War II? They don't know. And it just makes me wonder, 75 years from now, what is the knowledge among the general population going to be that the Holocaust occurred, the details of it? So anyway, it's a question in general. It's a philosophical question, a historical question, even though we can't really understand the impact of these horrors. Is it important for us to keep them alive, even in our memories?
And I
think it is.
I think that's the importance of cinema, Sheila, is
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
keep these things in our memory up front and don't forget them. And I think that's the importance of cinema. I'm sorry, Nancy, I interrupted you.
It's okay. Thank you.
No, Sheila, or for anybody who's listening, Gary, if you'll forgive me,
Not at all. That's what we're here. That's why we're here.
You heard I serve as a trustee of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust in Battery Park. we opened a new core exhibition in June, called The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do. I urge you to come down and see it. And it is breathtaking in the way we tell the story in this exhibition, which starts in the middle of the war, not in the 20s or 30s, and the lead up to the war. It starts on one day in 1943, April, in the middle of the war, and then goes back to the antecedents that led up to the war. But it's brilliantly executed, and we have thousands of artifacts that are ours.
Could you
on
tell us
display.
when that's going to be again and where, and I'll type it down in the comments so people know.
Well, it's the permanent core exhibition at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust in Battery Park, 36 and Battery Place. And
The new exhibit that
Thank you
were
for
describing,
telling us
is that
about it.
open now?
yes, it opened in June. It opened in June
June of last year.
this year.
We haven't had June
I'm
yet.
sorry, in June of last year. Yes,
You're
it opened in
confusing
June
me.
of last year.
Okay.
Let's hope we have.
No, it's it's called The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do.
Got it.
Not that
Thank you.
people want to go down and see it, but you're talking about learning, and it clearly you're an interested party, but I urge that you either go or go with friends to see this exhibition.
Thank you.
All right. Norma? Yeah, Norma Johnson.
Yes, your comments have been so meaningful and so moving. Thank you, all of you, very much. I wanted to make an observation about the end of the film and ask for your impressions. It's the very last film when he's walking through town on his way to reconnect with his mother. And he's musing on his future. And I heard two attitudes in there. One of them, it's sort of like he's speaking in a very bitter, kind of ironic way about what he can become. But I also felt there was, it included some expression of hope and a kind of a healthy defiance. And, you know, watching a film, of course, we project a lot of things into it. So we can't really know the motives, but those were my thoughts about it. Maybe some of you have some comments. Thank you.
I thought that closing voiceover was wonderful, brilliant, in fact. And I don't know if it's taken directly from the book or not, but this young man is at a watershed in his life. He's been to hell and back and has to form a future. And I thought it was a nice balance between, of course, some bitterness about what he's been through, but also probably due to his youth, some positive thoughts about what the future might hold for him.
Some people were asking if we could give them the name of the documentary about making Fateless and where we might be able to see it.
I saw it on the DVD. It's an extra feature there, and it's simply called The Making of Fateless. I don't know if it's available anywhere else.
And that DVD is long out of print, unfortunately, because the US distributor was a company called Think Film, which was a very good company in its day from maybe about 2003 to 2009, went through a very painful bankruptcy in which the rights to its films were scattered all over the place. Some landed in bankruptcy courts. The company was run by a very good guy, both a good businessman and great film taste, named Mark Ehrman, who deserves a little shout out. He passed away very untimely in 2019. So I think you're going to have to just try to find it, used copies via Amazon, or sometimes these extras are on YouTube.
Gary,
Yeah.
I just bought it a couple of weeks ago from Amazon. It's still available as a new DVD.
Well, I guess there must have been a lot of overstock copies. That would be
Yeah,
my
clearance sale, whatever.
Yes.
It's only
Yeah.
$4.95, so head out and get it.
Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to confirm for the woman who asked the last question about the ending that it does come directly from the book, where, you know, he imagines his mother's plan for his life, and he talks about the possibility of happiness, but he ends with those words, yes, the next time I am asked, I ought to speak about that, the happiness of the concentration camps, if indeed I am asked, and provided I myself don't forget. And again, I feel like the film wants to make sure that we don't too easily fall into now he can resume what was, resume his life, right? The film wants to say, yes, he will, and there's hope, but also, right, it
You
wants
can't
to leave
unlive
us.
it. You can't
Yeah,
unlive
he
it.
wants to leave us with that unsettled idea that there was a happiness in the concentration camps, that he knows something that we can't really understand.
Well,
Yeah,
you know,
that's-
I don't think I realized it was a true story, and I kept thinking in my head, and again, this kind of goes back to something someone said earlier, where you think, why aren't they just shooting him? Like, he's useless. It's like, why are they, like that was my thought process. And I'm like, oh my God, Lori, what the hell's wrong with you? And then when it said it was a true story, I was like, and I do these heritage films, short films here in Orlando, and you hear these stories about people on death marches that, the father bribed a guard with a gold watch and they got to flee. And, it's just so unimaginable that that could happen, but yet there's so many amazing stories. I wish there were more, so,
Mhm.
any other questions?
He could have been shot at any time.
Yeah, no,
Sure.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. It's like,
That's the more likely scenario.
yeah, exactly. And I kept thinking, oh my God, but there were some people that they were so lucky. It's just luck, because he was on
And
his way to being, put in the death pit in the mass grave,
And nobody's asked about the title of the film, but I feel like we'd be doing a disservice if we don't spend just a final minute,
Yeah.
right? Because just to pick up on what you just said, Lori, right? That idea of it could have happened at any minute. And he really wants to refuse the idea that it was fated,
Right,
right? That he wants to say it could have at any moment been a different story,
right.
right? And
If
to
he had
make us sit
chosen
with
to
that.
take the train and not the bus. And there was one guy in the movie, and it's funny because I once got in a car accident, and all I could remember, my friend just would have picked up the phone. I wouldn't have been at and that one guy kept saying 5 minutes. If I had just not 5 minutes, and it's how many times in your life have you thought that if this had just had happened, then this might have been different, and woulda, coulda, shoulda doesn't.
Well, and as somebody who teaches the Holocaust, it's something I need to really make certain my students understand, that there was nothing inevitable about the Holocaust. Because often, right, it's easy for them to think, well, this happened and then this happened and then inevitably that happened,
Right.
right? And there was nothing inevitable about it, right? And so when he says in both the book and the film, things could have always turned out differently, there's something really
Yeah.
poignant about that, not just for him, but historically. Things
Yeah.
could have always turned out differently.
And
I don't mean to go backwards. I want to, and it's that scene that I described with the actor who reports his body. The other scene that is unforgettable is when he is carrying heavy bags of something on his back, and the last shot with his hands waiting for it. It's so exquisite. It's awful, but it's exquisite. And also somebody mentioned the importance of having somebody looking after you. And I only know it as in referring to women, to women who would have helped each other if they were prisoners. And they're called Lagerschwesters, but I don't know the term for the men, but clearly that people were watching out for him.
I found myself,
Guarantee survival, but important.
I found myself describing this film to my partner by saying the atmosphere surrounding these people is so grim and depressing that the smallest act of simple kindness is magnified way out of proportion. And those are the moments that we really kind of dwell on in the film. And I assume that's a pretty accurate representation of what it was like. Just want to remind you, Lori, please give us a little talk on your lecture on Wednesday and the documentary next week.
Let me see if I can share my screen. No, I still can't. Just so everyone knows, this coming Wednesday at 3 o'clock, I'm doing my lecture on documentary cinema, the history of it. And then on Sunday, we'll have the filmmaker of the movie Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, about Jesse Owens, and that, you know, time period. And hopefully y'all come. I'm excited to share my documentary knowledge with you all. So hope to see you on the 3rd. Nancy, Rachel, thank you so much for your words of amazing insight into this horrific situation that we can never forget. So thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you, ladies. It's a privilege.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
and
everyone.
see
Thanks,
you
everyone, for being here.
Night.